My last big hunt really threw me. I was above snakes, but just barely. I'm trying not to scratch at my still bleeding wounds, but there I was in the middle of nowhere, sitting at the bar of this already half-dead boomtown. They haven't even named it yet. The maps were still being drawn up. I wasn't planning on staying long. I had a boat to catch out west. But you know what they say, make your plans and listen to God laugh. And boy, did that old geezer have something ornery in store for me. I figure I better write all this down before I forget. I've been making a habit of doing that lately. Forgetting, I mean. If not for my sake, maybe for the guild. Maybe for Katori and her people, who I was forced to abandon. Just thought we ought to know how to handle a beast like our dear old friend, the Raven Mocker. The best smelling spot in the whole town was the cemetery. The spring grass and the flowers laid on top of the fresh graves was a godsend after miles of gandering at nothing remotely man-made. I just rode into town when the preacher was giving the blessings over old Lester Conway's buried body. His little widow June was standing there just wailing. Wish I had someone to cry over me like that. Well, that night, the town undertaker was taken under himself by the drink at the brand new bar, that is. Seems the funeral was the talk of the small town. One of the can-can girls hopped up on the stool next to me and she started gabbing in my ear, telling me the rumors she heard about the whole deathly affair. She let it slip that good old boy Lester Conway may not have died of natural causes, as it was assumed. She said the undertaker was embalming the body and found, or rather, didn't find, the man's heart in his chest. It was gone, and he couldn't figure a way it got out of there as the body hadn't been cut open. But what bothered him most was how beat up the old man was. He had fresh bruises all up and down his body, which he took to mean he was thrown around before he took the fall down the stairs. And he had a big open wound at the very top of his head. Maybe it wasn't an accident at all. But no one could bear to suspect dear Mrs. Conway, a frail little lady from Kansas. She sure didn't look guilty to me that morning. No, I think something else is going on here, and I've got a nose for these things. So I went over and spoke to the undertaker and gave him some honest advice that night. I said to him, from here on out, bury the dead deep and quick if they wanted a good night's sleep and a peaceful morning. He didn't know what I meant yet, but his eyes showed me he heard me loud and clear, even over the liquor. That night's rest, if you could call it that, was taken between the shouts and laughter from the girls and gents downstairs at the boomtown's only hotel. But I couldn't bear another night under the stars in my wagon, waking up damp with dew, not while I was still healing up. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs and spoke with the barkeep. He told me I wasn't the only one passing through. Lots of odds and ends were rolling through like tumbleweeds, interested in the silver mines nearby. He wanted to know what I meant by burying the bodies quick and deep earlier that night, and I obliged him. I was Joe Avery, I told him, and I was a big game hunter heading west to go east for business. There was this old woman in the corner pretending to clean up and was leaning into the conversation, so I tried to make it brief. I told him there were forces in this world that can't be stopped by mere mortal means, and if I was right, and I usually am, this town is about to reckon with such forces. To my surprise, the man agreed. Spoke of a monster he thought was lurking on the outskirts of town. Mr. John Peyton was his name. He's a lonely farmer who doesn't come out during the day so nobody sees him. Thought him an American Jack the Ripper. Said his pa caught the White Death and came back from the dead to turn the rest of his family. But that sounded like paranoia to me. If I had to take anyone for a monster, it would have been the old haggard woman in the corner with her big old gawking, watering eyes. She dropped her broom and fled through the back door when she caught me looking at her. That's when a young Indian woman came into the bar. She had on this pretty linen dress with a bloody apron and had a long brown braid going down her back. Never seen a native jawing with the locals outside their village so late at night, but she was a real dandy. Maybe a little exhausted. And her name was Katori. Seems she was one of their first regulars there. She belonged to the Cherokee tribe nearby and was trading some of her wares for a few items for their medicine stores. Her English was real good, too. She told the barkeep there were folks dying in her village from some strange disease they picked up from a few traveling merchants a few weeks back. Some of the men at the bar suggested she should leave before they got sick, too. She agreed, but she warned them of an evil nighttime visitor called the Raven Mocker, coming for their dead and dying. The monsters can smell it, she says. According to her, they kill their victims by destroying the head, and then they inherit all the years the poor souls would have lived by absorbing their hearts, all without leaving a trace, and only a medicine man can see it. They didn't know whether to believe her or if she was just fooling. But my nose smelt something on her. I could smell the chase, the hunt in her blood. She was like me, all right. Katori called the Raven Mocker a shapeshifter, and any one of them in that town could be the little devil, including herself. Boy, did that whip them into a frenzy. That's when we all heard it. There was a loud screech in the night sky outside. Katori bolted for the door, telling us it meant someone was about to die soon. We all headed outside, drunk and scared, wanting to shoot the thing down. Then this strong wind nearly blows over everything not bolted down. Never seen anything like it. We looked up and saw something bright flying up in the air. It was like a flaming bird of some sort. It disappeared after a while, and the locals went back to their rabble-rousing inside the hotel bar. They tried to brush it all off, but I know they were shaken. I was too, I gotta admit. But I spotted the Indian girl behind the butcher shop, looking around corners and grabbing at the talisman that swung from her neck. I know a witch when I see one, and she was looking for something. I made the raw decision to hunt the huntress and nearly lost my head for it. She cornered me in an alley with the hatchet she produced from underneath her cloth apron. I had to confess and tell her the truth, why I was following her, that I was a member of the Hunters Guild of Dionysius. I could tell she didn't believe me, so I ripped off my shirt to bare my chest in the waning moonlight to show her the deep scabbing scar left from my latest tussle with a moon beast. She sure believed me then. We could both smell the rain coming across the plains, so we hopped in my covered wagon outside the limits of the infantile city. By the light of my lantern, I pulled out some artifacts from my travels, maybe hoping to impress her, I guess, and she showed me her ceremonial rattle that was filled with boar teeth. It felt nice to have someone to talk to who probably felt as lonely as I did. I've never met a witch so willing to show me the tools of her trade. She had a bright spirit, that's what her name meant, she told me, spirit. And I told her my name was Joe. I asked about her village. The rain stopped, and she pointed south into the wilderness where the lightning bugs started to come back to life. She said her people were just across the creek yonder. I'll never forget what she told me. Her family's tribe was marched here from their land out east by the government some years ago. They told her tribe they were going to a better place, and this is where they ended up. There's no place better in the world than where they were, she said, where her ancestors are buried. The ancestors who had always protected them, and they had to leave them all behind, leave them unprotected. I could see in her eyes it was something that still haunts the people of her tribe. She was the only medicine woman for miles, and she gave me a small satchel of herbs to help me heal. I suggested we join forces to rid the town of this Raven Mocker. I still had time to make port from California if we got the job done within the next day. She explained that all she had to do was look upon it, make her presence known. Then the Raven Mocker will die within 7 days. All I had to do was stand tall and still as an oak to protect the monster's target when the time came to make our move. The next night, we used a dying woman as bait at a ranch outside of town. It took some convincing with the aid of the local preacher, but eventually she trusted us. We waited and waited outside the house. There was no sign of it, just the still of the night and a symphony of crickets. And then we saw torches and lanterns crossing over the creek in the distance. They were shouting drunkenly and firing their rifles into the sky. A boomtowner had fallen ill from the mystery disease, and they were out for blood. Without a word, Katori fled and abandoned the ranch to defend her village, leaving me to contend with the Raven Mocker on my own. Then the old woman started hollering inside. I ran to her with my rattling silver saber in hand. Upon entering the bedroom where she was confined, I saw her suspended above the bed, gasping for air. She clawed at her neck, but neither her nor I saw anything there. I swung wildly at the invisible force, but it was no use. None of my swings landed on anything. She was swung around the room, smashing into walls and wooden furniture. The violence was immense. The poor woman was dying right in front of my eyes. I called upon the monster to release the woman, reciting all the religious texts I knew, but it only seemed to make it more powerful and vengeful. I had never felt so helpless in all my years of dealing with these demons. A sudden clacking came from the doorway. Katori was rattling her talisman and shouting at the monster no one but her could see. A scream rang out from somewhere in the room, and the far window exploded. The lanterns and candles extinguished, and we could feel the air being sucked out of the room just before it all went quiet. The old woman had dropped down onto the bed, catching her breath. She's shaken but alive for now. The medicine woman had cast out the raven mocker for good. It was now destined to die in 7 days. The town with no name was safe for that night, and I continued west the next morning. The spreading disease was only the start of their troubles, Katori said. Other raven mockers will return for their dead and dying, and a great feast was soon to begin.